right, what about testing controls? We know that you have to do that in an audit of an issuer, but for a non-issuer, you only do it if there's a perceived benefit, then you test controls. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to test controls. And there are some steps in carrying out tests of controls. So if tests of controls are to be performed on a particular accounting system, the auditor should, 1, anticipate what material misstatements might arise within that system. So, for example, if you're in the revenue cycle and you're anticipating material misstatements, one of the things you might anticipate is that accounts receivable might be overvalued. And that's because you might be afraid that goods may have been shipped out to customers without credit approval on many large, big dollar sales orders. So if that's the control that you want to test because the misstatement that you're afraid of is an overvaluation of accounts receivable, client's got a lot of receivables on the books, but they might never get paid because they didn't maybe check the credit before shipping the goods, then number 2, you'd have to learn the design of the system through, we said, writing a memo, drawing a flowchart, or completing a questionnaire. So we've done that. We've gained an understanding of the client's environment and an internal control, and we've documented our understanding through the use of one of these. And then the next step would be we're looking for specific control procedures that would prevent or detect the possible material misstatements that have been anticipated. So if we're concerned about overvalued receivables, then we got to look for a control that if that control is working, then we don't have to be as worried about the overvalued receivables. And the specific control we might be looking for is that the credit manager is supposed to perform a credit check prior to shipment of the goods if the sale is over a certain dollar amount. So if that's the control that we're looking for, and there is such a control because we documented it and we want to rely on it, we've got to test it. So in order to rely on that control, we've got to test it. So number 4, we'll make certain that those specific control procedures are operating effectively and efficiently as designed, and the only way we can come to that conclusion is to test this control. So now that we've identified a significant control within a system, we've got to ensure that it's functioning as designed. So we have several options. We could inquire, we could talk to the credit manager and ask her, hey, what is it that you do before the goods are shipped? You get a copy of the sales order, and what do you do? And she'll probably say something like, well, if the order is over $500, I have to check the credit before I approve of the sales order. So that would be inquiry. We could also reperform, see if we do the job and get the same results. Observation, we could watch as the credit manager performs her duties, and also inspection. We could look for physical proof that she's doing the job. For example, maybe what she does after she checks the credit, if the credit's good, she might put her initials on the sales order somewhere to indicate that the credit was checked. And if the credit is good, she might put a plus next to her initials. And if the credit's bad, she might put a minus next to her initials. And then if we wanted to see if she was doing that job, we would have to take some sales orders and look to see any of them that are over $500. Look for physical proof. See if her initials are there with pluses and minuses, and we'll get an indication of whether she's doing her job. Remember, why are we testing controls? Because if the control passes our test, then we may be able to do less substantive testing than originally planned. But only if the control passes the auditor's test. So if the auditor decides to test a certain control and the control passes the test, that's good news for the audit. That allows the auditor to increase detection risk, actually take a little bit more risk. By increasing detection risk, the auditor does less substantive testing, or may be able to substitute analytical procedures for certain substantive tests. Certain tests of details and balances might not need to be performed if the control passes the auditor's test. Maybe some analytical procedures could substitute for the more involved test of details and balances that would otherwise be necessary if we didn't test the controls or if the control didn't pass the test. Because remember, if controls are good, you could do less substantive testing. All right, to obtain audit evidence about control risk, an auditor ordinarily selects tests from a variety of techniques, including what? Inquiry, reperformance, Yeah, both. We could do both to test controls. So C is correct because to obtain evidence about control risk, we test controls from a variety of techniques, including inquiry, reperformance, what else? Observation, and also inspection. All right, segregation of duties, that's an important part of internal controls too. Auditor knows that certain client duties should be segregated. For example, the client's treasurer should not also be the client's controller. If the treasurer were stealing cash, she would be in a position as controller to cover the theft in the accounting records if she held both titles. And that's why certain duties need to be segregated so that the same individual cannot both steal and cover it up. Now, how does an auditor know client duties have been properly segregated? How does the auditor know whether they've been properly segregated or not? And the answer is observation and inquiry. That's how to best test for segregation of duties. Let's try this one. An auditor is performing tests of controls and has come to 1. Understand the design of a system, and 2. Identify specific activities that could lead to a reduction in the assessment of control risk. The auditor wants to test these activities to see if they are operating efficiently and effectively as intended. To do this, the auditor can 1. Talk with the employees and observe the work being done. Sure, that's inquiry. 2. Look for physical evidence that the activity was carried out. Yes, that's inspection. So the first one deals with inquiry and observation. It says observe the work being done. So you have inquiry and observation in number 1. You have inspection in number 2, looking for physical evidence that the activity was carried out. So the answer must be both. And we'll go with C here. All right, let's try this. Which of the following procedures is considered a test of controls? A. An auditor evaluates whether a general journal entry was recorded at the proper amount. So they're looking at the general ledger, they're seeing a journal entry, and they want to know if that entry was recorded at the proper amount. Is that a test of controls? No. A test of controls would be like the person who made that journal entry, should they have made the entry or should somebody else have made the entry? That would be a test of controls. But the fact that we're looking at a journal entry to see if it was made for the proper amount, that's very important to the audit, but that's a substantive test. That we do in the evidence gathering stage. So A is out. B says an auditor interviews and observes appropriate personnel to determine segregation of duties. Yeah, that would be a test of controls. So let's go with B. And a big part of the exam in this area is you're going to need to know the difference between a test of controls and a substantive test. And if the auditor is looking at the general ledger to see if an entry was made for the proper amount, that's a test performed in the evidence gathering stage of the audit. That's not done in the internal control stage where we test controls. So we test controls in the internal control stage and we do evidence gathering later on. So in this question, if they would have asked about whether the person who made the journal entry in letter A should have actually made the entry or should they have not been able to make the entry, then it would be a test of controls. Maybe we were looking at segregation of duties or something like that. But when you're looking at a particular test of details or test of balances, that's evidence gathering. That's not a test of controls. Which of the following is a test of controls? A. An auditor's review of the entity's check register for unrecorded liabilities. So the auditor's looking at the company's check register, see what checks were written, because they're looking for unrecorded liabilities. Well, that's an evidence gathering technique. When you're looking for balances like unrecorded liability balances, you're making sure that liabilities that should have been recorded were recorded. That's a substantive test. So A is not a test of controls. How about B? An auditor observing client personnel create a sales order. Yeah, that would be a test of controls. They want to see who's creating the sales order, what they're doing with that sales order, who's getting a copy of that sales order. So observation of client personnel, we know that as a test of controls. So B is the answer. An auditor observing client personnel creating a sales order, that's a test of controls because observation is one of the ways to test controls. But searching for unrecorded liabilities, that's a substantive test performed later in the audit. That's performed in the evidence gathering stage. All right, when testing controls, the best method for an independent auditor to test segregation of duties. What do you think the answer is? Let me know in the comments section below. And then don't forget to like and subscribe because it helps the channel out a lot. And then if you need more help passing audit, go to CPAexamtutoring.com, get yourself on I-75, the right road